So I guess, judging from the wordings on the screen behind me, this conference is titled Towards a Citizen-Centric Civil Service. And indeed, I think when we talk at the ASEAN level, we're not merely paying lip service to this term citizen-centric civil services. For our 5-year plan under the ASEAN Civil Service Meta Conference, which is one of the sectoral bodies under ASEAN, we have actually dedicated our 5-year work plan from 2015 all the way to 2020 as striving towards a citizen-centric public service. And also, I think in a declaration that all the 10 ASEAN countries signed in Manila in 2017, it was also towards, I think, putting in place the structures and the initiatives necessary for us to succeed as citizen-centric services. So I guess that's very much in line with the topic and scope of the OECD report. And in fact, rather than to go at length about what the Singapore public service structures and governance look like, I intend actually to be able to basically talk about 2 of the initiatives which the Singapore government has undertaken, which I think qualifies as a citizen-centric government initiatives, and actually compare it against the OECD, the sort of like theories and the best practices as espoused in the OECD report. So, in the Singapore government, every government actually has been pursuing public service reforms and public sector transformation. I think in some countries, like I heard from Mr. Adi this morning, it has an entire ministry dedicated to bureaucratic reforms. So I think that's, I guess, par for the course as far as ASEAN countries go. In Singapore, we call it public sector transformation. In our own way, it's the way we transform the Singapore public services actually to build a future Singapore. I shan't bore you with the 15 different areas we think the future Singapore would look like, but let me share with you this interesting diagram which my head of civil service shared in an internal meeting with all civil service public sector leaders in Singapore as to what public transformation means at various levels. So those Lego blocks that you see there, correspond with what we think any transformation initiative needs to look like at various levels. WOG means whole of government. I think that should have entered the lexicon of most public sectors already. Ministry family for us means something at the departmental level. And at the last line there, which is all officers, mean something that we are willing to actually extend down to the individual level at the officer level, we call them. So for us, public sector transformation has got a few thrusts to them. One is go digital. I think I probably don't need to explain that. I think that's probably the buzzword for all government in the past few years. But it also says that actually the public sector transformation also needs to focus on engaging citizens, innovating and service itself, as well as, I think, the internal element of skilling up individual public services skill sets. And at the whole of government level, we give particular focus to each of these main trusts through several sort of like initiatives that we drive centrally. All of them will be championed directly by the head of civil service, and a committee typically formed by a number of permanent secretaries covering a number of agencies would be set up to oversee some of those efforts. So we have got a public sector transformation committee to look at digital, to look at citizen and community engagement, to look at service delivery, and to look at people development. And I will elaborate on 2 of these initiatives called the service journey as well as the digital government blueprint shortly in the slides itself. At the individual, how we want this whole thing to play out, it's not that it's just a bunch of slogans that's being pushed through the central, and that once it reaches the own departmental level, you start polling individual officers on the ground, and none of them will be able to sort of like say what public sector means to them. In fact, it's a bit of an hourglass-shaped way of us pursuing this public sector transformation. All these main initiatives that we trust that I've been mentioning must come together in a set of ministry, family, transformation, and digitalization plans, which means to say we would ask every single ministry family to come up with a set of plans that shows how they are transforming their own area. For example, the Ministry of Education in education, the Ministry of Home Affairs, let's say in Homeland Security, how they are willing to be able to pull together these four elements of going digital, increasing citizen engagement, providing better service, and also upskilling their own officers very, very clearly within their own domain. And these plans would be revisited and reviewed by central agencies as well by the head of civil service themselves. And this is how we make sure that these central initiatives find their contextualization in individual agencies' plan through a set of agency-specific transformation and digitalization plan. So I'm just pulling this out from, when the government at a glance draft report became ready, I asked my assistant to help me pull out the three principles in the report which argued how you go about building a citizen-centric public service. So according to Edwin, a citizen-centric public service means to say that service needs to be coordinated. It requires openness, engagement, transparency, and accountability, making the right policy and expenditure choice and anticipate citizen needs. So I would say, the Singapore government agrees with all of that. In fact, I'm going to show you how, for example, we have gone about coordinating services across all government agencies. So at the Singapore Public Service, we intentionally continually innovate in service delivery as one public service. I guess that word one public service actually means a lot. I mean, even a country as small as Singapore, we have 82 agencies. 15 ministries, 82 agencies. Whenever there's any problem, that citizens or members of parliament raise, like a rat infestation problem, typically, any response will have a string of acronyms representing agencies that say, we are committed to work together to solve some problems. I think to the extent where individual citizens will be scratching their head, what exactly do some of these acronyms mean? I think if you talk about MOE, most people will be able to say it's the Ministry of Education, but when you go down to ACRA, or A star as an acronym, people will scratch their head and say, A stands for agency, but the remaining three alphabets, they have not really a clue of how that means. So that to us actually is, I think we realize that's one of the drawbacks of government services. We arrange ourselves functionally around capability bases, regulations, legislations that we have to serve people, but citizens, as problems evolve, may not be able to logically, infer how we organize ourselves and therefore know how to deal with us. Nor should that actually be be citizens' problem, because if you break down, let's say, a service into its various components, actually, there is a set of government interactions and government processes that actually relate to a citizen's particular, let's say, end-to-end needs. So let's take, for example, end of life. At end of life typically starts when someone passes away, down to the point where he's being cremated and possibly cremated and maybe the ashes will be dispersed, down to the point where the assets are being, let's say, passed and dispersed to the people laid out in the will. This, to a citizen, is what an episode looks like. It starts off from a person dying, it ends off with, let's say, the asset allocation from that particular death being resolved. But to the government agencies back end, that's not how they look at that particular episode. The Ministry of Home Affairs, for example, may look at saying, it's to issue the certificate of death. And for me to be able to deregister this citizen from my citizen records. From the National Environment Agency, it could mean getting them a slot to be able to send their bodies for cremation at a nationally run cremation center. And if you were to ask agencies how they will want to improve someone's end-of-life journey, they would typically say, oh yeah, I can reduce the cremation application time from, let's say, 6 hours to 3 hours. And this is how people look at that. This is how banks have been looking at, let's say, new accounts set up, dealing with customers. This is how possibly Amazon, in its early days have been looking at consolidating across its entire businesses. But that's not how the way any multinational would regard, its citizen or its customer's journey in today's context. If to the being citizen-centric means to say that if a particular service is seen as end-to-end from the citizen's perspective, it is the role of the government to be able to treat the string of processes underlying it as something end-to-end, as something that needs to be streamlined in an integrated fashion, and something that needs to be optimized for the citizen. So we were looking at 2 levels beneath that. Each service journey serves a specific role. There will be, a clear start and end points, like I mentioned in the death example. Someone passes away, assets are being divided up. Orchestration and alignment of back and front end processes and policies. How should, for example, the ministry that issues a death certificate be able to send the information over to the ministry that arranges for the cremation, so that you won't have to ask the same information of a very, very big, grieving family, multiple times. And also, it's anchored on specific, what we call jobs to be done. Let me give you a very concrete example. I think middle of last year, the Singapore government launched this thing called a Moments of Life family app. I mentioned death just now is one of the, I guess, not very happy moments, but I think this was originally launched for people who have newborn children. So if you go to the Apple store, I think you should be able to find this app down there, even though you probably will not be able to access the services. So we have identified, for example, a newborn as one of these first moments of life that we want to settle. Just to give you a sense of the complexity, there are close to, I think, 15 government agencies that you need to interact with 10 days before and 10 days after your child gets born. So, in your regular, Singapore context, when you're suffering contractions, you will start, timing the contractions at a certain appropriate time. You'll get yourself warded, and two days later, if it is an uncomplicated birth, 3 days if it's cesarean, you'll leave the hospital. But at that time, you will also be frustrating about trying to how many of you know Redmart or Lazada? So typically, the average Singaporean would have a pre-prepared baby starter pack, and they will go down there and order nappies and all those things, and they will all arrive. A confinement lady, which is something that's very Singaporean, will also be this thing that we will have to do. We'll go to the nearest train station and pick up a confinement nanny, who typically is a Malaysian, to come and help us with our tending to our child in the first month. So there's very little in this, like 3 days after the birth of a child, to really worry about what government agencies I need to deal with. Yet there are 15, and it's something as sort of like, nominal as registering for the baby's birth and applying for some baby parental packages, and later on to be able to keep track of the vaccination records, because at the point the baby is born and 1 week after, there's actually a series of vaccinations that need to be done and needed to be certified. And there are certain, parenting information and everything. So there is actually quite a lot of interaction with government agencies, and we are saying, actually, they do end up asking for the same set of information. What's the date of birth of your child, what's the name of your child, what's the name of both parents, which actually, you end up filling the same information in the same maybe pink-colored forms, 4 times, just that they've got different agency stickers back end. So we said, okay, first of all, nothing should be on paper, because we are in the digital age, and you really shouldn't have anyone, leave the ward unless you need to buy nappies, and therefore everything should be on a digital platform. The second thing is, don't make someone fill in an information, more than once, because once someone gets it, you should be able to route it to the next government agency, and citizens shouldn't have to be exposed to inefficiencies in government bureaucratic processes. So generally, it has to be more convenient, so just do everything in 2 or 3 steps on the handphone. So this is what it was. It started off with us trying to uncover what happens in the -10 plus 10 days of a child being born, and identifying all the different government agencies who will be sending you letters or forms to be filled, and cramming them all together in an app that takes no more than, I think, 3 or 4 clicks to be able to achieve. That, to us, is being citizen-centric. That, to us, is the heart. Citizen-centric means being able to coordinate among ourselves as government agencies the points of duplication, the points of inconveniences, and to be able to bring, something that is perhaps not very value-adding to a citizen in the most straightforward, streamlined way, so they can sort of like concentrate on the main task at hand, which is basically to get the baby out of the hospital and into the hands of the confinement lady, and maybe to be able to, I think, grab their last meal together as a couple before their lives are forever bound to the baby. Yes. So that's one. That's an example of how the Singapore government looks at coordinating services. So I thought that would be a good illustration, I think, to highlight, I think, one of the principles that Edwin has very kindly laid out in the OECD report. The second thing here is that if you notice carefully, I could have left the word digital or digital platforms out from my last 3 or 4 slides at all, and it would still be, a way in which the government goes about coordinating services. It could still be 3 ping forms rather than 15 ping forms with no duplication of information. But I think for us, an additional challenge, and that's why the public service transformation plan for us actually has got the element of go digital as well as service. That's because that I think in today's context, we cannot run away from the idea that the digital impetus or the opportunities that digitalization provides us creates a win-win situation, for both the customers we serve as well as back-end processes. It may be that we took, the equivalent of 15 man-hours to process every single newborn when you add together the 15 agencies, and it may take, let's say, 2 man-hours for the citizen to be able to comply with our things. Digitalization provides us a means to be able to achieve that same outcome with maybe just 1 man-hour from the government agency and half a man-hour, let's say, from the citizen end. Digitalization is a game changer. It's a way to be able to achieve something that was done manually before, in much less time, with much better outcomes. So the 3 things we always said was an impossibility. Cheaper, better, faster actually is possible when you look at digitalization. So for us, actually, we take every opportunity we have when we are transforming our services and everything to actually also digitalize. And it's not only digitalization for digitalization's sake, but also actually is to take this digitalization opportunity to be able to serve with a heart, to be able to add that personal touch to it, rather than to, let the digital layer take away, that very, very human and emotional link that should exist between government and its citizen. So the moments of life is one such thing. When we do want to say that the government cares for you by giving you a parental care package, we make sure that, those things are highlighted in the app itself. But the things that are plainly just transactional, we try to keep them to a minimum as much as possible. And in fact, underlying the entire public sector transformation journey, some very, very hard measurements and requirements about how all government agencies should be looking at their digital services from now on. So there is a requirement by 2023, and this was announced by our Deputy Prime Minister last year, that all citizens and business services by the government are supposed to, yes, one, design with users' needs in mind, but I think the hard factors are that there's an e-payment option for all government services, pre-filled form with government verified data for all government services, digital option for wet ink signature for all government services, and the requirement for as much data to be put on in a machine readable format in readily accessible data platforms, such that citizens and businesses can innovate on top of a government platform and data. So this is the very hard central requirements the Singapore government has put in place to make sure that, yes, notwithstanding that, we may be targeting, let's say, a service journey, and in fact we have 15 service journeys ongoing, it might only be a small subset of the thousands of services that the government provides for citizens, but we want to set in place certain very hard rules, certain broad-based rules which all agencies have to adhere to. E-payment, no wet ink signature. I should never require a citizen to come to my office, queue up for hours on end just to be able to sign a form. Everything should be able to be done at the luxury of their own homes, if they want to. But if they want to come to a government office and to be able to have a personal touch, understand, let's say, certain regulations and policy which they don't understand, there should always be a human face in front of that, consulting them on that. But for the ones who don't really care and who just want to get your $5 parking fine out of the way, they shouldn't have to pay $5 parking, at the Ministry of, Transport to be able to pay a $5 fine. They can do it, on their way to work on the app or something like that. But I think one other important thing which I think the OECD reports also stated is that I think it's this paragraph which my staff helped me extract it, about how, let me just go closer because I can't really see this angle, that in addition to service quality, openness, and transparency, citizen centricity is linked to a competent civil service that can deliver. So I think that's actually going to be a huge barrier that is going to impede a lot of civil services from being able to digitalize and to introduce very cutting edge, let's say, services to citizens. For example, when I talked about service journey and I gave you an outline of the sorts of methodologies that an agency, that any public servant ought to be able to understand in order to deliver citizen-centric services. I may as well be speaking to them about the sorts of methodologies which the various innovation labs this morning talked about. It's not something that's intuitive. A lot of, let's say, consultants and companies such as IDEO have built their entire sort of like value proposition around these things. How do we make sure that down to the last of our 145,000 public service officers, they are able to understand what digitalization means, what service innovation and service journey means. So we actually have a similar set of requirements for public service as well under our digital government blueprint, which is the following things. Basic digital literacy. I think this morning Dr. Piawat talked about how the Thai government is coming up with a set of digital skills. I think we've learned a lot from them. Last year, my permanent secretary, we came over, visited Dr. Piawat's outfit called the Office of the Public Service Training Institute, not far away from here, and we were basically saying, okay, the digital skills template by the Thai government looks amazing, and we just said, can we just copy, take it back and get it translated and copy most of it? And in fact, that's largely what we did. So for us, basic digital literacy now becomes a basic requirement for all 145,000 officers. We just launched on 1st of April an app that basically any public officer should be able to download on their handphone, and with like 5 minutes sort of like modules that if you go through everything, they should be have an understanding of the basic technologies that are out there right now. Blockchain, AI, data science, IoT, Internet of Things. They should be able to understand the latest cybersecurity threats. They should be able to understand, I think, how you use technology at work, and they should be able to understand how to communicate both with citizens and among themselves using the latest technological platforms. So this to us, I think, is one important aspect of it. But it's not going to be enough. I mean, everyone understanding basic digital literacy, but we still need, I think, a large percentage of officers. And for us, this is like, this is 20,000, which comes up to roughly 15% of the entire public Singapore, the public workforce. We want them to be trained in data analytics and data science. So they are able, as part of a service journey or any form of analysis that involves citizen, be able to use the latest visualization tool, to be able to tap on AIs and chatbots, to be able to deliver, I think, the best outcomes for citizens. We've also, I think, ensured that a certain critical digital workplace tools be put in place so that they are able to interact with citizens and among themselves in a much more seamless fashion. For example, video conferencing. Have you all heard of Slack, for example? Social collaboration channels such that the work among different government agencies will be much more streamlined. And obviously, I think to be able to make better policies and decisions supported by data and automation through very strict controls over how we, let's say, structure our data, how we share data internally, and who has access to what data, and how we classify data such that certain data could be stored on the cloud versus something which has to be, I think, stored in more secure environment because of today's, data security and the risk of cyber attacks. So I think I'm going to stop here. So I basically wanted to take this plenary session not as a speech, as you can see, but mainly to describe to you how two initiatives, both of them at the very whole of government level, is our attempt to be able to, I think, bring to life certain principles of citizen centricity, and how I think these principles surrounding citizen centricity is actually quite well tied to how the OECD has actually laid it as such in their report. And I think it is probably no understatement to say that actually it's not entirely a set of coincidence that our strategies have come out so closely aligned to OECD. That's because I think we have been with the OECD in the past 2 or 3 years to help them with collecting the survey, and also to answer the survey ourselves and look at how OECD countries have been presenting such data and have been organizing their strategy. So this benchmarking actually has worked for Singapore quite a lot. And this is particularly true at the time where we are formulating and finalizing our public sector transformation strategy, as well as us setting up our new department that has to deal with digital government and smart nation. So I would like to take this opportunity to give a word of thanks to Edwin, who has been a very integral part of this journey for us, and all the OECD staff who have been helping us, along the way to clarify, what it means for us to, go about doing good digital government, go about doing good open government, and to be able to, I think, point us to how other OECDs actually have been doing it through their various case studies and research. So yes, thank you very much.
Next, I would like to invite Mr. Marcus Bonturi, the Director of Public Government Directorate from OECD, to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Loh, for this great presentation, which shows to us in practice what does it mean to have a citizen-centric civil service, and shows what this is all about. It's peer learning, and that we all learning from each other, and exercises like that do enrich the policy debate, and we are learning a lot from Singapore. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us today. And I wanted to share with you, use the time that I have to share with you some of the findings of, I would say, the very, very first OECD government at a glance for Southeast Asia. We have done similar exercises for OECD countries a number of times. Every 2 or 3 years, we have a new one for OECD countries. We have done an exercise for Latin America already a couple times, but this is the first time we do that for Southeast Asia. And there's quite a bit of interest to do similar exercises for countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe. So this is becoming a big hit, and I will try to make you understand why this is so important. I want to special words of welcome to our delegates from ASEAN countries, and I understand that most of you have been directly involved in providing the data, providing the information for the publication, also making us understand better what your needs were as we move forward. And I would say without you, without the very hard work that you put into this report would not have been possible. So thank you again very much for your contributions. A big word of thanks, of course, to our host, Thailand, Kingdom of Thailand. Thank you so much. The Office of the Public Sector Development Commission, especially here in Thailand, but also Kazatat University. Thank you very much for hosting this conference, and the OECD Korea Policy Center, who also helped us make this event possible. As you know, the central topic for the very first Southeast Asia government at a glance is citizen-centric civil service, which is, of course, a shared goal. As we heard from Mr. Loh, is a shared goal in ASEAN, in OECD, and beyond. If you see all those technological changes, this is really becoming more and more of a priority for countries at different levels of development. But what does that mean in practice? Governments, I would say governments become more citizen-centric when citizens help drive policy decisions, and when they help shape the provision of public services. And then, of course, for that to happen, governments need to have a more thorough understanding of the expectations of citizens, the experiences of citizens, and what are the key drivers of citizens' satisfaction. So at the end of the day, it's all about evidence. And evidence, of course, is built on good data. And that's where the OECD comes in. That's our main function. The government at a glance series is now the most downloaded publication of the OECD. There's a huge demand out there for this publication. And I would say, I would dare say, because we've been doing this for many, many years for other countries, this has proved its worth to policymakers, but also to the wider community that is interested in governance issues. Let me go back to what it means to make public services more citizen-centric. I think it means focusing on what works. And that's why it's so important for us to work with you to collect data on a number of issues. Budget practices and finances, strategic human resource management, digital government, open government data. And we did that together for all the 10 ASEAN member states, and that's very, very important. When we start then analyzing this data, the idea is to help enable governments to understand better what works, and whether the current practices, support or hinder the provision of public services that indeed respond to the needs of the citizens. The idea is that if you start looking at this data, it will help you identify the gaps and help you perhaps on your reflection to potential solutions. By providing the latest available data on the functioning and performance of public administrations in ASEAN, countries can better understand their own practices. They can track their achievements by comparing not only regionally but beyond with other countries, and again, learn from the experiences of other countries. They are facing similar challenges. With that information in hand, then they can work towards perhaps a better informed reform process. So I would say that the government at a glance in Southeast Asia is a first step. It is not as broad and comprehensive as the exercises we have run for OECD countries, but it's a very, very good and important first step. It gathers 34 indicators, on a number of topics, as I mentioned before. And the idea, I mean, if you take a step back, and if you agree that strengthening public sector institutional capacities is important, both for economic growth and for improving the quality of life for citizens, then you understand the link to policy reforms. Very often, and this happens a lot, not only in this region, governments undertake public sector reform programs, which, again, the aims are positive. They aim to make government more efficient, more effective, more transparent, but they do that in the absence of good quality information and data. They do not understand fully the impact that these reforms will have on citizens. So the publication is meant, again, to fill this evidence gap here in this particular case of ASEAN member states. I would say that in the area of public governance, the OECD, what we do here is that we are sharing international practices, international good governance practices that we have gathered not only in this region but in other regions. So the countries in ASEAN can identify the practices which are the best suited for their own needs, for your own ambitions. And we are able to, again, to take into account the differences in the cultures, in the levels of economic development, in the history, the political traditions, administrative traditions. All countries are different. So the indicators that we have designed together, they try to capture the common practices that can be applicable under very diverse conditions. So we're not here to promote one-size-fits-all solutions. We are not here to rank. That's not the objective of the exercises. So again, is benchmarking? Yes, but it's really meant as an information tool to allow you to better develop your own reform processes. We hope you find this helpful. We hope you find it's practical. I'm also want to highlight that the work does not end, of course, with the development of indicators. The OECD spends a huge amount of effort and energy in developing indicators, but our work doesn't stop there. We're also ready to accompany countries in their reform processes and then provide more tailored, more hands-on guidance and advice for the countries which are interested. Just tomorrow, if you're here with us tomorrow, we'll launch a special review of Thailand at the request of Thailand. Is the Open and Connected Government Review. I hope you'll be with us. The idea is to help review the design, the governance, and the implementation of open and digital government policies in line with Thailand's own ambitious goals. It's, of course, related to Thailand's 20-year national strategy, Thailand 4.0. Again, we feel that by doing something like that, we can work with Thailand, but also use the examples we learn from Thailand to help us guide the experiences of countries around the world. And we hope, if you are with us, you find it very interesting and you learn a lot from I'll say the concrete implementation challenges faced by Thailand. Again, this is an example of the type of peer review processes that we do at the OECD, where we bring not only the expertise embedded in the OECD Secretariat. I would say this is a very smart part of the process. The strength of the process that is a true peer learning process, which involves practitioners from a number of other countries in the discussion of strategies, priorities, actions. So those practitioners from other countries bring their own experiences to work hands-on with whichever country has asked for a review. And we're very much ready, if there's interest from you around the table, that we undertake similar policy reviews. We can do that across a very wide range of policy areas, from budgeting policies, from regulatory policies, from public sector integrity, open government to digital government, budget issues. So again, we can tailor those type of reviews. And the invitation is not only for you to work with us on a review of your own situation, but we may also ask for your expertise as we review third countries. So very interesting for us to have some of our ASEAN partners from ASEAN countries helping us when we are reviewing countries like Peru or Canada or Romania, for instance. So again, we want you to be part of that network of experts, of practitioners. Then you can bring your experiences to bear also to countries in other regions who are may be facing similar challenges. I would finish by saying that this work that we're doing with Southeast Asia and the Government at a Glance publication is a sign of our commitment to work with you, to work for you, to learn from your experiences. We have, as you probably know, a formal partnership since 2014. It's been already 5 years through the OECD Southeast Asia Regional Program. There are a number of networks that bring in government officials from ASEAN countries with countries from other regions for dedicated discussions on different topics. We are very excited to continue this work with you. We have been partnering quite effectively, I would say, with a number of other institutions in the region, the ASEAN Secretariat, of course, the Asian Development Bank, and a number of others. And the idea is that we are more relevant for you, that the exercise needs to be relevant for you, but you need to help us with that. We're already actually thinking about the next round, the next topics for the Southeast Asia Government at a Glance, hopefully in 2 or 3 years' time. We can review the indicators, update the indicators, and perhaps broaden the coverage of the publication as well. So what we'll do is we'll set up a steering group with representatives from the region, your colleagues, so we can collect your ideas, collect your priorities, and then, of course, you need to help us ensure that that whatever we're doing is relevant for you, for your needs, your reform needs, and that's what we're here for. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for this great partnership. Again, I'm looking forward to the discussions today and tomorrow. Thank you.